Good morning, everyone. Great to see everyone on this very chilly morning. I've heard it's the coldest morning since the 1940s or something. One of my team was saying this morning. It was -1 degree in Houndorf when I left home. I don't know what it's been like around the rest of the state, but it's certainly been very chilly, but it's going to be a great day. I'm going to kick off and we'll get moving with the session. Welcome to today's co-investment fund session. This is a really important moment, I think, in terms of the work that the government's been doing around nature-based and heritage tourism. And as the CEO, my name's Sean de Bruin of the Tourism Industry Council. We're really pleased to be a part of this session today and help facilitate the information that the government and the Department for Environment and Water will put forward today. Before getting into the session, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultural and connections to the land and waters of Australia. The session today will be recorded, so we will be sending out a link to the recording for those people that either want to go back on the session or miss the session due to other commitments. So please be aware that that will be circulated later. The recording will be circulated later today. In terms of the meeting etiquette, it looks like everyone's done the right thing, but please put your microphone on mute. But I encourage you to please ask questions and make comments via the in-meeting chat. That I see some people starting to make comments now. Please continue that commentary, and one of the speakers will potentially use some of that commentary to answer questions later on in the session. The overview of today's session, the first speaker, who has been slightly delayed, so we may make her the second speaker, is Jo Podolyak, that many of you would know. Jo is the Director of Tourism and Economic Development with the Department for Environment and Water, or DEW. Jo will outline the state government's commitment to nature and heritage tourism and the aspiration of the co-investment fund that we're here for today, and also the Parks 2025 plan that the government has put forward. After Jo, we'll then hear the second speaker will be Chris Thomas. Again, I'm sure many, if not most of you, would know Chris. He's been a long-term servant of the Department for Environment and Water, has done many good projects in past years. His title is Manager of Tourism and Visitor Services. Chris will provide the next level of detail for us in terms of the co-investment fund. He'll provide an explanation around the guidelines. Hopefully you might have had a chance to have a look at the guidelines. It's a very good document. Eligibility, conservation, this concept of conservation dividend, which is fundamental to the co-investment fund, support services and more. And Chris will also take questions at the end of his session. So again, I encourage you to put questions up on the chat facility for today. And then I will finish out the session and provide a little bit of information around further support for people and businesses that are looking to explore the co-investment opportunity that's being discussed. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not sure. Jo, are you there online somewhere? Please, if you are, come off mute and start speaking. If not, Chris, I hope you're there somewhere.
I'm certainly here.
Good on you, Chris. maybe we'll, I'm not exactly, I assume Joe, with that non-response, that Joe's been tied up. So maybe Chris, if you can start the information that you're going to provide, and then when Joe makes herself available, she can give the broader context.
Okay, sure. And yeah, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us, and thanks for coming along. It's a great turn up. And I'm going to try and work the technology here. I've got to share this somehow. See if I can share my screen. Can people see that screen? Yep, excellent. Parks 2025. So Joe was going to talk today about Parks 2025 and the government's commitment to nature-based and heritage tourism. And when she joins us, I'm sure she'll talk to us about that. But I just thought to give you a bit of context for today's discussion around the co-investment fund, it's probably important just to very quickly reflect on Parks 2025. So this was released at the end of last year, earlier this year, the end of last year, as really a $22 million investment in parks and protected areas around South Australia. There are 5 key projects that I just want to bring to your attention, because these are sort of game-changing government-led investments that I wanted you to know about, because you may, in thinking about how you can build your own businesses, want to leverage off some of these investments. And I'll run through these very quickly because Joe will talk a bit more about them, but certainly we're looking to create the Southern Flinders Ranges National Park, so a collection of land from around the Southern Flinders Ranges. Some of it was old forestry, some of it was private land that we bought. We're creating this Southern Flinders Ranges National Park, and we're hoping to create a $10 million investment there over the next 3 years. That's a really exciting 3 hours north of Adelaide, so it's a very accessible new nature-based tourism destination. Likewise, the Ediacara fossil experience, those fossils are unique, world-class. We have to be able to turn those into a nature-based tourism experience to bring people from all over the world to South Australia. So another $3 million investment going in there. Cleland, obviously Cleland Wildlife Park. Everyone loves Cleland Wildlife Park, but it is a bit tired. It needs a bit of an uplift. So we're going to be putting $1 million or more into Cleland Wildlife Park to lift the visitor experience there, to try to create a more compelling visitor attraction in and around Adelaide. And obviously Icara Flinders Ranges National Park and the beautiful Wilpena Pound, another $1 million going in there to really try to lift that experience again for international and domestic visitors. And then the one we're here to talk about today on the top left there, the Nature-Based Tourism Co-Investment Fund. So I'll spend a bit more time talking about that today. It's a $5 million investment over the next 2 years. And on the right there, Kangaroo Island fire recovery. So, given the devastating bushfires we've had this year, followed up with COVID-19, it's been a pretty torturous 2020. But the government's kicked in some money for $7 million for Kangaroo Island in terms of bushfire recovery. Plus, we're going to get a lot of insurance money to try to recover and build back better on the western end of Kangaroo Island, particularly in Flinders Chase and Kelly Hill Conservation Parks. And the Premier was just on the island on Friday announcing a $52 million investment on Kangaroo Island, largely around a reimagining process for the western end of the island, which has now commenced. So if you are interested in being part of the discussion around reimagining Kangaroo Island over the next 3 to 6 months, please check out our website for more information. And then just already to talk, while we're talking about sort of government investment in nature-based and heritage tourism, the 4 projects on the bottom, I would be remiss if I didn't mention them to you. We're doing a lot of work at the moment opening up reservoirs around the state, working with SA Water and Forestry SA. Obviously, our reservoirs have pretty much been off limits forever, and now seeing SA Water working with the community, working with us to open up these reserves, there's great potential there for nature-based tourism experiences. And so SA Water is keen for us to include their reservoirs in our conversation today about the co-investment fund. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a while. The Wild South Coast Way is the walking experience from Cape Jervis to Victor Harbour. $6 million investment there, probably over the next 2 years. We're looking to transform that southern coastal walk into a world-class walking experience, working closely with the councils and with our friends of the Hyson Trail. We've got a great project underway there, and we think it's going to be in an hour and a half from Adelaide. It's going to be another great visitor experience. Glenthorne National Park, you might have heard a bit about this. The Minister finally got that proclaimed last week. This is the newest national park in Adelaide, only second to Belair, just 30 minutes from the city. A collection of pieces of land that we're going to transform over the next 5 to 10 years into what people would traditionally see as a national park. Lots of revegetation, lots of local community activity. So a great one at creating green space for health, well-being and recreation in and around Adelaide. And our statewide renewals program, that is basically a $3.3 million fund with $2 million ongoing to make sure the infrastructure in our primary national parks and campgrounds is kept up to standards. So making sure that visitors to our parks are getting a quality visitor experience. And what we will talk a bit more about today is, this is going back a couple of years, the project that we released, Nature Like Nowhere Else, so our activating nature-based tourism strategy, plus also we're now working on a heritage tourism strategy. So those two strategies really underpin everything we're doing with nature-based tourism and heritage tourism in South Australia. If you haven't seen those, again, I would encourage you to get a copy off our website. They do underpin all of the work that we're doing with parks, with our rangers, with our volunteer rangers, with our parks renewal program. So everything we're doing is trying to activate with industry, nature and heritage tourism for the benefit of our state. So again, a little bit of context there. But the main thing I really wanted to talk about today was the Nature-Based Tourism Co-Investment Fund. And this was obviously launched last month, and you might have heard, hopefully you've been on the website, hopefully you've had a chance to look through the guidelines. If you have, I'll probably be talking about a lot of the stuff that you've already read, but this is really perhaps for me to put a bit more of my emphasis on what I think the fund is all about and try to work with you, and I'll welcome your questions and queries. It is definitely about activating nature-based tourism in South Australia. We've got some great existing products and experiences, but we really need to do more if we want to attract more people to come to South Australia from interstate and overseas, but also if we want to attract a greater share of the market. I think South Australia has always been a little bit in the shadow of the eastern states, and now Tasmania is really rising up. So I think we have to do more if we're going to be competitive on the international stage. And so this fund is not about, let's be honest, it's not about recovering or helping businesses through difficult times. It's actually about helping grow businesses and create new experiences for the future so that South Australia can really rise up and be an international world-class destination for nature-based and heritage tourism. So we are unashamed about that. We're looking for a small number of very high quality experiences and programs and projects out of this fund. It's really not a small community-based funding scheme. And so we'll talk a bit more about how we've created a very high bar for this funding, but that's in order to get the best experiences we can out of this fund. So at the moment we have $5 million to share. The way this fund works is the government will match up to 50% of the project costs. So the proponent, if you're looking to apply for this fund, you have to bring at least 50% of the funding to the table. And we will, if it's a good project and meets all the criteria, we'll look to match it 50-50. But obviously, if you can put more money in, you're more likely to get some funding from us. So at least 50-50 on your part. We're very clear that it's got to be about tangible project expenses, real things that visitors are going to be able to take advantage of when they come here. So in-kind contributions are not to be included in the project funding. Sometimes in-kind is included, but for this fund, given it's only $5 million, we really want that $5 million to be used for tangible experiences and assets that actually will make an ongoing contribution to the visitor economy. Again, it's not a small grant scheme, so the minimum co-contribution from the government is 20,000. So with a partner's 20 plus thousand, that's at least a $40,000 project, up to $1 million co-contribution, so up to a $2 million project. So these are reasonably sizable projects. And of course, the fund is open till June 2022. So we're not looking for people to put in applications urgently. There's not a deadline. We're not looking to have a limited number of competitive bids. It's actually an open fund for 2 years, and you can take your time to work up your proposals over those 2 years and submit when you're ready to submit. And we'll talk a bit more about how we can help you with your applications to make sure that when you do submit an application, it's the best possible application you can submit. You've got all the information, you've got all the business cases, you've got the best possible chance of getting funding. So it's a little bit of a different fund in that regard, in that it's not competitive and it's not time limited. So we're really hoping by doing that, that the cream will rise to the top and we'll get some fantastic applications. Of course, we're trying not to be too prescriptive with what the market and the industry wants to put forward. You might remember a few years ago, we came out with 18 specific offerings. And I think the feedback to that process was the scope was too narrow and that the private sector and organisations would like to do things perhaps that we hadn't thought of. So this time round, we are leaving the scope very open. We want you to think about what you could deliver for your market through your business. There are some restrictions, of course, as with any public fund, but we'd really like you to think creatively about, again, as I come back to it, how do you take your business to the next level? How do you create a visitor experience that goes beyond what we've currently got on offer? So it might be a new or improved tourism experience. It could be a cultural tour. It could be some light infrastructure. It could be some pop-up facilities. It could be a walking experience. So we want you to think about what you think is a bit of a game changer for South Australia. And again, think about where you'd like to deliver that experience, perhaps to create a visitor destination that doesn't currently exist. So we want you to be creative, and I'll go through some of the experiences and opportunities that we see in a while. But just want to be really clear, all of this is set out in the guidelines. So if you haven't seen the guidelines, please refer to the guidelines. But again, be creative, be thoughtful, take the time to think about how you could add real value to the visitor economy in forming up your applications. We get asked a lot, probably the most commonly asked question that we get is who's eligible? And we've tried to think creatively again about the mix of enterprises that might be interested in this fund. We are very clear that it is a tourism related fund, so we are looking very much at the tourism sector generally for applications, but it might be that you're a private business, it might be that you're a partnership or a conglomerate of business enterprises, you might be a local government body, you could be an Aboriginal corporation, or you could be an association. And there's probably variations on those themes. Really, as long as you're a legal entity and are able to contract with the government for funding, we are open to talking to you about potential projects. Obviously, we want people who are looking to invest long term. This fund is really about setting up South Australia to deliver these visitor experiences in the long term. So we're looking for partners to come on board with us. We're going to put in funding together. We want to actually develop these experiences in partnership. So in that regard, it's a slightly different fund as well. This is not government just handing out money. It's actually government partnering with private enterprise and organisations to develop and provide long-term visitor experiences that either don't currently exist or that have been enhanced from what is already there. So the list there is, I think it's fairly open. I think most people can probably, hopefully you can see where you fit within that list. You could just be a sole trader or a small business, or you could actually be a large business looking to add an extra product. So, and particularly local government. I think we're seeing a lot of regional development at the moment being led by local government and Regional Development Australia. So It may be that local government wants to partner with some local businesses to put in an application as a business cluster. So again, think creatively about how you can bring a mix of people to the table. You don't have to hold all the risk yourself. Obviously, the government's going to partner with you in the funding. So if you want to bring multiple people to the table to make your project really come alive, we would encourage you to go and think about who you could partner with. And again, the fact that there's no closing date for the application means you've got more time to go and look for potential partners to put into your funding application. Where projects can be located, this is one obviously that we put a lot of thought into. And I'll come back to the original intent of the fund is to activate tourism on public land and also Aboriginal land. So, obviously this is public money, and we've put a focus on, if we're going to spend public money, where can we make sure that the public is going to have access to the assets and the benefit products that are created. So most of these are basically public lands. So I just want to put that right on front. If your project is exclusively about developing something on your private land, it's probably not going to be eligible for this fund. So this is really about how do we activate public lands, whether they be national parks, reserves, whether they be Crown land under the care and control of either the minister or the council. It could be a botanic gardens because they're managed by the state. It could be a state heritage listed place under the care and control of the Minister for Environment and Water. It could be a historic shipwreck, or we've been talking more recently with obviously Aboriginal landowners and councils about them wanting to participate and create Aboriginal tourism experiences on their land. So that is very much, again, lands that we either co-manage with Aboriginal people, or Aboriginal people are managing their own lands. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, forestry and SA Water have come on board as well, and really do want us to see if we can use this fund to create some tourism experiences on either forestry land or SA Water land, and particularly the reservoirs that I mentioned before. Anyone who hasn't been to my Ponga recently, which is just down the road from me, my Ponga is just a beautiful reservoir. It's been opened up to the public, and there is definitely a nature-based tourism experience to be had in there, an investment to be had in there, if we can get the right proposal and applicant to come on board. So they're the lands that we're looking at developing these projects on. And obviously, if you're not sure about whether your project is in or not, please, I'll talk a bit further down in a minute about the support services that we're offering tour operators or proponents as part of this to test your ideas and to make sure that your application is going to be well received when it turns up.
Chris?
Yes, I just wanted to say, any questions before I go on? No one said anything, but...
Chris, it's Sean here.
Yeah.
I actually believe Joe has just joined us. So
okay.
Would it be worthwhile just to skip back to a couple of your earlier slides and then just
sure.
Move into some of the further detail, and Joe can give a bit more context on some of the elements you've touched on. Are you there, Joe? If you are, please come off mute. Maybe she's not there. I thought she was there. So, all right. Sorry, Chris.
No, that's fine. Well, look, given Joe might not be there, how about I just pause there for a moment and see whether there's any questions before I move on.
And please ask people to put the questions up on the group chat. Ian from Escape Goat Tours has a question, Chris. I assume you can see the group chat.
I can now. I've just realised where it is. There you go. I'm not a Zoom. I'm a Teams player. I'm not a Zoomer, but that's all right. I'm learning.
The other thing you might want to do, Chris, is we can actually see your slides. You want to actually change it to a larger slideshow, because we can see all of your slides on the left-hand side, if that makes sense too. But that's a minor thing. But Ian has a question there around timing, and it might just be good for you to touch on that.
Yes, okay, so this is one, yeah, what we've undertook to do is once we've received an application and we've had a preliminary look through your application, we'll be able to give you an indication of timeframes. And now, obviously everyone would like to know, exactly how long is it going to take to get an answer, but it really will depend on the nature of your application. But what we've committed to this time around through our case management team is that we'll keep the proponent updated regularly, and we'll try to give you a realistic time frame for when you can expect a decision. And I'll come back to the panel in a bit later, but we've actually set up an assessment panel to meet every 4 to 6 weeks. So even though there is no deadline for your application, the panel is going to be meeting regularly. And so if you submit on day X, it's likely that your application will be considered probably in the next session or the session after, so probably in 4 to 6 weeks. So we can't give an exact date, but it won't be months and months, I guarantee. It'll be short, sharp feedback, and hopefully we can get you a decision in a reasonable time so you can then go on and get your approvals. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah, Chris, there's a couple of questions there about the mix of public-private land.
Yeah.
And obviously this is something that I know you've looked at as part of the process. Are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, so obviously the government money and the fund is really targeted at activating tourism on public land. But obviously, if you as a proponent want to put up some private land as well in your application, then there's nothing to stop you doing that. It's just the public money will have to be spent on public land. It's quite possible that your co-investment, the money that you're putting up, might actually be spent on park or off park. So again, it'll come down to your application, and obviously the more private land you include in your application, the less the weaker your application will be. So we're not saying you can't have public and private land as a sort of a bigger project, but the funding will be very targeted at the public land component. It's difficult to give you exact answers because until we see the sort of applications, we don't actually know what people have got in train. It may be that you own a property next to a conservation park and that you want to put a spur trail from your property into the conservation park to join up with a walking trail in the park. That might be completely legitimate, and we might actually co-fund that for you because it's going to be activating the park. So it will be case by case a bit, but the more of your project that is based in public land, the better it will be, and the more funding you might be able to attach.
I suggest there's a few other questions popping up, Chris, but I suggest that you push on because I think that the information that you're going to move through will answer some of those questions.
Yeah, sure. Okay, but please don't let me go without coming back to your questions. I'm keen to respond to those. Again, it's a lot of information in a short amount of time, and I've got a lot of people around the screen. So yeah, if we don't get to your question today, I'll certainly follow up afterwards. So just in terms of the process, some people have asked about the process, and we've tried to think about how we can make this as streamlined and as efficient as possible, particularly given people want the certainty of knowing whether they're going to get funding or not before they do too much work on their project. So at the top there, stage 1 pre-lodgement, which is really where we're starting today. So we've got the website up and running. The guidelines are there. There's a phone number. There's an email you can contact us on, and the partnership with Tourism Industry Council SA. Thanks, Sean, partnering with us to deliver these sorts of sessions, and there's a series of other sessions coming up after this. And that's really about trying to help potential applicants at the front end put together really strong business proposals, applications before you actually come into the system. What we tend to find is that some processes are drawn out because we don't get all the information up front, and there's a lot of toing and froing with the proponent to actually try to extract the right information, and that can be quite frustrating. So we put all this investment up front to make sure that when your application finally lands with us, we've done everything we can to make sure it's almost ready to go straight to the assessment panel. So So that's what we're hoping here, is that a bit of investment up front, we'll get some quality applications. The assessment panel will meet, I said, every 4 to 6 weeks. They will recommend or not recommend those applications proceed. Ultimately, they proceed to the minister. The minister is responsible for the fund. He will yes or no based on the assessment panel's advice, and then we'll be able to give you an answer, hopefully within 1 or 2 sessions. 6 to 8 weeks, we should be able to get you a response as to whether your application is supported or not supported.
Chris, Sean here. Can I just, sorry to interrupt you, I've just had 1 or 2 comments.
Yep.
Can you try and make your PowerPoint full screen? Because some people are having trouble reading it.
That is full screen.
I think it's not this end, because I can actually see all of your slides on.
Oh, okay. Let me just reshare it then, because I just made it full screen. And thanks for the feedback. Again, not a zoomer. Share. See if this is better.
That's it. You nailed it.
Okay, good one. Thank you.
Well done, Chris.
Sorry for that. Technology.
And this slide's actually in the guidelines as well, though, I believe, Chris. So the detail is there in the guidelines as well, I think.
Yep. So all of this is in the guidelines. But I just thought it'd be worth running through it quickly just to give you a sense of how it works. What we want to do with the fund assessment, so stage 2 fund assessment, is get you a decision around the funding early. Because what happens with a lot of projects is the project itself can take 12 to 18 months. You might need to get a development approval, you might need to get some sort of heritage assessment, I mean, depending on what you want to do. So actually getting the project to be shovel ready and digging in the ground can take a long time, but what we can do with the funding is get you an answer about the funding early, so that the funding commitment can be made to you subject to you getting all of the approvals you need. So what we found before is that expecting proponents to get all the project ready to go and then come to us can actually mean that they've done a lot of work before they've got certainty around the funding. So we want to provide certainty around the funding up front, and then take you to stage 3, which is really about helping you through the approvals process. And so we've got a team set up in the department who will actually, once you've got a funding approval, will take you through that case management process and help you all the way through to you getting your project approved, your project delivered, and then obviously the reporting and acquittals of all the funding at the end of the project. So it's really about working in partnership with you to help you through the system. The system is there to protect all the interests, but so we can't cut corners, but what we can do is we can streamline the system and help you through it, so that we're not bumbling around expecting you to do all the legwork in a very uncertain environment. We want to help you through the process that can be quite difficult to navigate, and because we do this all the time, we're actually quite clear on what needs to happen. So that's the approval process we're going to run through, and hopefully we can get projects delivered as quick as we can. But again, it has to go through the right process. The criteria. So again, at the start, I talked about this. We're setting the bar quite high. Our parks and public spaces are community assets. They're world class. We need to make sure that we're creating the right sorts of experiences. And so we've got these 5 criteria, and you'll see that they're all equally weighted. So they're 20%. So the assessment panel will weight these equally. So if your application doesn't have all 5, you may not get your funding, or you may not get all your funding. So you really need to make sure your application addresses all 5 of these criteria. I spoke at the start about the nature-based tourism strategy, the nature like nowhere else. Again, it's a very simple strategy, but it's really about picking what stands out for South Australia, what South Australia's competitive advantage is, and really putting our emphasis there. So if your proposal aligns with that strategy, you'll meet that criteria. Obviously, environmental, social and economic benefit. We're looking for projects that are going to be successes, long-term successes. We're not looking for a flash in the pan here. We're looking for projects that stack up environmentally, socially and economically. And because we're talking about our parks and public places and our sensitive nature and wildlife, obviously criteria 3, we put a specific conservation dividend criteria in there. So we don't want these just to be normal tourism experiences or developments. We want these to be adding extra benefit back into conservation. So if you want to partner with us to do tourism development in a national park, we expect you to go above and beyond the approvals process. We ask you to give back to conservation, and it might be, you might set up a fund, you might engage the local friends group to do some revegetation or rewilding, you might have a creative idea about supporting a local community group to do some conservation work in an adjacent area. So we haven't specified exactly what it is. We've given you some case studies in the guidelines and on our website, some things that we think are really good case studies for the conservation dividend. But just to be really clear, we do want these tourism, the fund to support tourism that goes above and beyond in terms of conservation. Obviously, the fourth criteria is around your capability to deliver the project. So we'll be looking for, business partners who have got credibility, who've got all the business savvy we need. They're going to be good long-term partners. Again, not just flash in the pan. And ultimately, the project has got to be good value for money. We're not going to spend public money on things that really we can't see a return on investment down the track. This is really about creating visitor experiences that are going to be valued and are worth the public funding at this part of the project. So think about your value proposition, your return on investment. Obviously, the government will enter into terms with proponents if it's through a lease or a license, but we're looking for value for money to be a consideration. So there are 5 criteria, 20% each. The assessment panel will look through every application. I would strongly encourage you to make sure you've got all 5 of those covered in your application. And really, just to make that point again, it's really about getting projects that deliver all 3. So it's got to be a positive conservation benefit. It's got to be able to sit comfortably within the local community environment. So we want projects that support and benefit the local community. And we also want, obviously, economic benefit for the state. The economy is critical, and obviously nature-based tourism is one of those sectors, fast-growing sectors, that's really about driving our economic growth, but it's not at the cost of the other 2. So every project's going to have this suite of triple bottom line to make sure that we're really delivering world-class experiences. We thought we'd just put some funding priorities in there just to give you a taste. Again, we don't want to be too prescriptive, but these are the sorts of projects that we think would be worthy of high credit when it came to funding applications. We talked about Parks 2025 at the start. They're the experiences. So anything that leverages off the government investment, if you want to piggyback on what the government's already doing, that's going to add value to the visitor experience. I think that would be a very high priority. Standout walking journeys, again, that's out of our nature-based tourism strategy. South Australia has got some fantastic walking experiences, but they can be enhanced and we could do more. And obviously the Wild South Coast Way on the Southern Flurio is a classic example of that, where we're looking to leverage some private investment off the back of that $6 million investment. Wildlife experiences, people come to South Australia for our nature and wildlife. We've got, and I put in marine wildlife particularly because 5,000 kilometres of coast, we've got some of the most unique wildlife, and we've got, I think, online here with us some of our wonderful marine tourism operators here already showcasing, our sharks, our dolphins, our sea lions, our cuttlefish. But what else could we do to bring our marine life to everyone? Aboriginal and cultural tourism. Again, something we really want to put a focus on. We've got a lot of interest here in developing more Aboriginal tourism content. It would be great if we could develop some further. It doesn't have to be necessarily wholly Aboriginal. It can be a partnership with an existing tour operator and an Aboriginal community working together. We're open to collaborations, but we really would love to have more Aboriginal cultural tourism. And obviously heritage. We've got a state full of wonderful heritage assets. How can we get better use of our heritage assets? How can we adaptively reuse this wonderful heritage that we've got? for cultural tourism, heritage tourism, or other tourism, which includes our botanic gardens. So they're what we consider to be the priorities. If your experience fits in there, you've got a very good chance of getting funding. So I think we've talked a bit about conservation. We really do want this to be seen as a conservation-led development. It's about compatibility, so we're looking for projects that fit within the setting, is sort of how I talk about it. It's got to be appropriate for the setting. We don't want inappropriate developments in beautiful landscapes. It's got to, we're talking about sustainability, eco-friendly, can we use local products, can we use sustainable products? Engaging the community. In the guidelines, you'll see reference to early engagement with local friends groups. We would really like your idea, your project, to be co-designed with your local community. We don't want necessarily approvals to be given and the community to have no visibility of what you're proposing to do. So we would certainly encourage you to talk to your local council, talk to your local community in formulating your application. Because the stronger the community support for your application, the better your application will be. Education and advocacy, of course, most projects will involve working with visitors to create an immersive visitor experience, so we'd expect education and advocacy to be part of your offering. And the conservation dividend we've mentioned, so going above and beyond for conservation through your project. Mention the case studies. These are just a couple, the Kuranda Sky Rail and Robert Pennicott from Tasmania. He's been doing some great stuff. Again, both ecotourism accredited, both National Tourism Award winners. They've got some fantastic examples of what we mean by a conservation dividend. So have a read of those if you're a bit unclear. They're not by no means the only examples, but they're two quite nice examples. And in terms of the support services we provide, again, this is all set out in the guidelines, but we've got an email address where you can flick questions and comments to. TICSA obviously is running these information sessions, and over the next 2 weeks there'll be a number of sessions there, and I'd certainly encourage you to get involved with those webinars to make sure you're getting the full value out of this package. It's challenging putting an application together, I know. So take advantage of that support and make sure your application is as strong as possible. And we've got some FAQs on our website, and certainly after today, I'll go back through the chat feed and try to write up some answers to those questions and include those on the website. So check into our website regularly if you're interested in FAQs, because we'll probably update those every week. Just when we hear more questions coming through, we'll make sure those answers are going out for everyone. It's not just a one-on-one. We want to share our knowledge with everyone and make sure someone's got a question we haven't thought of. Let's put the answer up there and share it. Some other insights that you might like to have a look at. So we're currently putting up what we call some snapshots on our website. So we're going through all of our online booking, our vehicle entry information. We're looking at some of the Tourism Commission data to try to sort of create a sort of a snapshot of all of our national parks and regions. So that if you've got a particular interest in, say, Innis National Park, you can go on to one of the Yorke Peninsula snapshot and have a look at the data that we've got for Yorke Peninsula, which includes visitor data to Innis National Park, camping nights, day entry visits. So if you want to get a sense of how popular our national parks are currently through the data that we gather, we're happy to share that data with you through those snapshots. That might just help you in building your business case if you're looking to add some value to some of those experiences. We also own a lot of state heritage, so if you're interested in some state heritage, we can put you in touch with our Heritage SA team, and they can talk through some of those heritage assets we've got. They've got condition reports for all of our buildings, so that might just be useful if you're looking to do that. It might be other assets or services, so it might be what sort of utilities or park facilities have we got, and we've got asset reports for all of our parks. We can tell you what sort of assets are in the parks. And we've also got a stakeholder list. So we know a lot of the community groups, the stakeholders, the friends groups who are interested in different parks. So if you've got an interest in Manbury Creek Park, for example, we can put you in touch with the local community and the friends group to make sure that you're thinking through your ideas, you're connecting up with the local community stakeholders to make a good proposal. So these are snapshots, just a quick what the snapshots look like. Again, we've got 3 on our website at the moment. We'll have the rest of them up over the next week. So yeah, check into the website if you're interested in this data. They're about 9 or 10 pages each, and there's one for each region. That's tourism region. And so yeah, they're there really to help give you a sense of the data that we've got around current visitation to our parks. And so I might just leave it there and hopefully come back to some of those questions that people were wanting to ask about. Is that all right, Sean? Have we got time for some?
Yes, we have. We've got plenty of time. I think Jo's been having some technical issues her end, so I don't believe, unless something's changed, that we're going to be able to hear from Jo.
Okay.
So if you've got access to the chat room.
I do. I'm just going to go back.
And there's been a number of questions, Chris. It'd be good if you could quickly touch on them.
Yep.
We've still got plenty of time in this,
okay, good.
this Zoom call.
Let me come back to, I think we've dealt with the private land, environmental lease of.
David had a good question. Dave had a good question,
Yep.
Chris, about where an organisation has an environmental lease of Crown land.
Yeah, so to do with Crown land, happy to take that offline. I would certainly encourage you to contact our support service team at that phone number and email with that specific query, because they manage all of our Crown land in the state. So if you've got queries about specific parcels of land, definitely fire off an email or make a call to the Crown team, and they'll give you an answer on that specifically. As a general term, if it's not in the care and control of the minister or the council, it's not currently included. So we just need to check your eligibility for that. But again, don't be put off by ask the question directly of the Crown Lands team, and we'll get you an answer to that.
The next one, Chris, is Renee has a question about wetlands on a publicly listed winery property. That may be one you have to take offline as well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, some of these are probably outside of my knowledge viewpoint, but I would certainly encourage we get you a definitive response to some of these. Certainly wouldn't want to suggest you're excluded if actually you are not excluded. Just on first pass there, I'm not sure which category it would fall into, but happy to take that one up with our team as well.
Anthony Coles has a question around CapEx investment in public land assets. A bit more of a technical financial question. Are you equipped to answer that one, Chris?
I think if that's to do with ownership of the asset, maybe. Yeah, in terms of if you want to build an asset on public land, generally the asset reverts to the Crown at the end of the term of the agreement. And so obviously in granting a lease for that to occur, we'd obviously have to negotiate fair terms. So if it was a $500,000 investment, it may be that we negotiate an extended lease to make sure that that investment can be realised. But yeah, at the end of the day, our leases require that the asset is returned to the Crown or removed. So if it was a pop-up infrastructure, then obviously you can pop it up and take it away. But if it's permanently built, it would either have to be removed or revert to the Crown. But again, I can get you definitely contact our support service with your specific query, and we'll make sure you get a specific response.
The next one, Chris, is Susan Lee. And her point is sometimes it's good to say projects that wouldn't be considered. We've obviously talked extensively about the guidelines and projects that would be considered. Can you give a few off the top of your head that maybe just wouldn't?
Yeah, well, look, it's probably projects that don't have a tourism offering, I guess. So some people have come to us and said, "Oh, we want to build a meatworks, or we want to, build a recreational football pitch," and we said, well, that's not really about tourism. So this is very much about activating tourism. So we want to be very clear that there's a tourism benefit. It's not just necessarily about local community. It's really about trying to make South Australia a domestic and international destination. Also, those in-kind costs. So again, projects that are offering a lot of in-kind, obviously very hard for us to fund. Projects that don't have any community benefit. So it might be someone wants to build something that the community is completely opposed to. So they are things definitely that we would not be willing to consider investing in. Hence why we're encouraging people to work in forming up their proposal, work with their local communities to make sure that it's fitting for the setting. We don't want high-rise casinos. We don't want, inappropriate developments in beautiful national parks and botanic gardens. It's got to be fit for a setting. And so we're looking for sensitive, innovative, world-class tourism developments and experiences so if it doesn't fit that, if it really looks awful, it's not going to get funded.
Thanks, Chris. Steve's got a question about Aboriginal heritage tourism projects and his experience dealing with the Department of Premier and Cabinet. And I think his point is really about getting bogged down in bureaucracy and going through processes that can be problematic for stakeholders that are engaging. Obviously, that's something that some people today will be interested in. In terms of and I guess maybe I could frame the question slightly differently, that in my experience dealing with Jew for many years, this is one of probably, if not the most exciting opportunity. The devil's always in the detail and how you work through the process. How is the department with the minister has made a huge commitment to this project and to the opportunities and the benefits. How is the department going to make sure that things don't get bogged down, Chris?
Yeah, look, and it's a good question because, as I mentioned earlier, we're not shortcutting the process. What we're doing is trying to streamline, and so we are working whole of government behind this, and it's good in one sense that the Premier is now the tourism minister because the Premier has a lot of ownership of this process as well. But we do work across government. We're working with obviously SA Water, with Aboriginal Affairs, with a number of other agencies because we're trying to put that investment in up front and build the pathways to speed up the process. It still has to go through the process, but we hope that we've lined it up early to be able to move through that process as quickly as possible. And so we don't get some of these traditional frustrations that we hear about a lot from proponents. But ultimately it will come down to the proposal. If it's a fairly sensitive proposal, we're going to have to help you navigate through those approval processes. And again, the earlier we can start working with you on that, the better.
Thanks, Chris. Julie Smith has a question, and I'm not sure if this is relevant, but if you have any knowledge of it. In terms of the Indigenous Cultural Centre planned for Lot 14, is Jew involved in this at all? This is probably external to the what we're talking about today, but just wondering if you have any comment.
Yeah, obviously the department's involved. It's a whole of government, again, a whole of government initiative. It's not associated with this project. And I don't actually have a lot of knowledge of what is happening there, but certainly the department is involved because it does align with what we're trying to do.
I can actually add to that one. It was coincidental. I sent an email to the Premier's office yesterday on that project, Julie, and asked where it was at and saying that tourism see it as a great opportunity. And they certainly acknowledge that there's great tourism benefits, not only for that project. There's obviously a huge cultural importance placed on it as well. So the Mayor's office is certainly pushing ahead full steam on that one. Port Lincoln, there's a question about jetties and management of jetties. Obviously, they're significant public assets.
Yep. Yeah, and again, look, I think that potentially is included. So we'd certainly be able to get you specific advice on that. Just depends on the tenure of it, but you're right. If it's under the care and control of council's public jetty, it may well be included.
Mike has a question. I don't fully understand it. If you can see that one, Chris. If you have a few different program ideas that they could share funding resources, is it okay to submit a single application? So maybe that's about putting 2 or 3 things forward at the same
and look, yes, absolutely. We encourage people to think creatively about what's included in their application. We don't mind if it's a single project or it's a cluster of smaller projects. It's really about wrapping it all up into a single application. Probably makes it easier for us to work through. But obviously we'll look at the whole of the application on merit. So there may be some bits of it that are stronger than other bits, and that's what the assessment process will do. It'll identify which bits are appropriate and which bits might not be. And so, yeah, encourage you to put forward ideas as a cluster project, if you like, if that's what you would like to do. We really don't want to limit. We don't want to limit unduly the applications we get, as long as they fit the criteria. They're eligible, but if you want to be creative, we'd encourage that.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Outdoor SA, question here about sustainability in relation to, you've talked about sustainability. In what context? Can you give us a bit of context around that, your use of sustainability?
So there's 2 elements to that, as I see it. One is business sustainability. That is that we're going to partner with businesses that want to be in this for the long term. So we're looking to create and to invest in experiences that are enduring. That's not just a short, sharp crash and boom. So that sort of sustainability is really important. Plus, obviously, the environmental sustainability, so fit for the setting, but also sorts of materials and systems that you're using. We would love, taking renewable energy, locally sourced products, locally sourced labour, environmentally friendly systems, anything that we can do to improve the environmental sustainability of these experiences. Certainly would be encouraging you to do that.
A good quick shout out to Teresa and Whyalla and the wonderful giant cuttlefish.
Yep.
And it's obviously an amazing visitor experience. If you haven't done it, I encourage you to get out there and do it. Make sure you get a nice thick wetsuit. It's an absolute wonderful phenomenon.
Yep.
Outdoor SA again. In terms of funding to support operations getting to market, Chris, where does the department sit on that? That obviously not just developing the experience and the infrastructure, but making sure that there's customers to come is an important part of the business investment. Where does GU sit around that?
So we've had this question before. I mean, basically the fund isn't going to be available for marketing per se. So that would be at the expense of the proponent. What we're looking to do is to invest in the product development and the assets that sit behind the experience, so that the proponent can spend more money in the marketing of their experience. So we have to draw the line somewhere, obviously, and we actually want to see tangible investments, and marketing as being critical. We just see as something that the government can't invest in at this time.
Outdoors SA again, around if people have products that will not require significant infrastructure but operational support to start the project, is this eligible?
Yeah, it depends what's involved in that. In the guidelines, there's a list of project expenses that we've excluded, and some of that is sort of business as usual. It can be admin costs, it can be license costs, it can be consultant costs. So there's a lot of intangible costs that will be excluded from the fund. I'd suggest certainly have a look at the guidelines about those. Operational support probably sounds like those sorts of intangible costs to me, but I wouldn't like to give you a definitive answer without knowing what you had in mind. But if it's not something tangible, if it's not something a product that's going to be visible to a visitor, then it's likely to be excluded.
Ken Jones has a question around infrastructure and its vulnerability to vandalism. There will need to be expectations on private proponents to maintain and revert to Crown land. Pop-up is best, but that would be vehicle. Is that possible? There's a few points there, Chris. I don't know if you can touch on that one.
Yeah, and the capitalisation worries me a bit, but that's all right. Look, yes, obviously, our park assets are potentially vulnerable to vandalism. I mean, we've got assets in 360 parks across the state, so we deal with this daily, and we obviously have rangers, and this is a partnership arrangement, so we would certainly do our best to work with proponents to minimise a risk of vandalism as part of our normal business operations. But it is a reality that we do sometimes get people doing the wrong thing. Less so these days, I have to say. With our online booking system, it's become much less of an issue because we know where people are going to be and we can target our resources accordingly. So, but it's possible. Yes, so that our standard policy is that anything that's built in a park would revert back to the Crown or have to be removed at the end of the licence or lease term. That doesn't mean that further leases can't be negotiated. So it's really just if the parties wish to separate and walk away from it, there's a responsibility on the proponent to either return to the Crown or to remove. Yeah, pop-ups seems to be quite popular because obviously South Australia is quite a seasonal tourism offering. We've got a very large state. The north's very different to the south, and having pop-up infrastructure might be something to take some of that seasonality and that risk out for business and government. So we would welcome proposals that de-risk the visitor experience. I think that is how I'd frame it, is if you can operate 365 days a year because you've got a mobile or an innovative pop-up proposal, then I think that would probably add value to the investment.
I might skip down a few, Chris.
Yep.
Pen's got a question there about the matching component of funding.
Yep.
Is there any reason why proponents couldn't look to other grant programs to help them out with that 50% other piece?
Yep, no, absolutely. You can find your funding from a variety of different sources. We've listed those in the guidelines. If you get a Commonwealth grant or you get a Regions grant, or you've got some other private beneficiary who's going to grant you some money, absolutely. We're actually not necessarily that concerned where the grant comes from, your co-contribution money comes from. It's really more that you have a funding source secured, or that you can secure a funding source, so that we have confidence that your business enterprise is credible and capable of delivering the project. Yeah, and traditionally going to the bank and getting your money, that might be one way, but there are much more innovative ways these times, and we'd welcome people bringing whatever creative financial solution they have to the table, which might be partnerships with a number of enterprises coming together to pool their money to deliver a proposal.
Amol has a question, Chris, around one-off grants and the profit sharing of the operation with stakeholders.
It's going to be, so these are one-off, one-off grants. So obviously we'd be looking to grant a project money for the totality of the project. Not quite sure what the profit sharing, obviously that would be depending on the nature of the applicant. If it's a conglomerate, that would need to be managed privately. I would assume that there'd be some arrangement for how the profit sharing works. Now the grant money is shared. We would just need to know who the legal entity is we're contracting.
Because maybe that also goes to a point, Chris, around the project needs to be ingrained in the local community, and there needs to be a high level of cooperation and coordination with local stakeholders, and the conservation dividend concept that you talked about as well.
Oh, that's what, okay, yeah. So that's okay. So that's where that one's going. I didn't realise that was going there.
I just took it down. I'm not quite sure if it is either, Chris.
No,
just maybe speak to
one option could be that the proponent, through the conservation dividend, wants to offer some community grants. It could be to a local friends group to do some vegetation work. So they might want, and I know there are operators around the table here who have a similar sort of local community grant fund, and they support environmental projects through their profits as a way of embracing the community and sharing the experiences that they've got with their community. I think it's a great model. Absolutely. That's all part of that. If it's conservation dividend, that's what we'd be looking at as part of that.
We'll finish with two final ones, Chris, and I've just lost it. I've got it here. So Carol, that talks about funding levels from state government to national parks, and some of the challenges, and the desire. I guess obviously she's very passionate about parks and conservation values. Are you able to speak to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we do hear that a lot, and we've got, as I said, 360 parks across South Australia. I mean, it's impossible to manage them all to a certain level. We have to, focus on the ones that are on a handful of parks and service them really well, and then rely on the more remote and the self-sustaining ones to be a little more self-sufficient. But in terms of park ranges, we've increased. So last year the government funded an increase of 20 park ranges. So that was all part of the rebranding of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. We're also putting on 100 new volunteer ranges, really to try to respond to some of this feedback from the community that rangers and volunteer rangers and campground hosts haven't been very present when people have been visiting, and that creates problems. Plus, we work with our friends groups to undertake really important park maintenance, weeding and revegetation. So it's an ongoing challenge for us, but we do think that with this latest round of investments, the $22 million with the Parks 2025, we're going to improve the visitor experiences in our parks, which means we're going to have more capacity to deal with some of these legacy issues, or even just upgrade some of our tired facilities, just put more work into some of those parks for the benefit of the community and our visitors. So it's an ongoing challenge, but I think this government's really, really committed to parks and investing in parks and creating a better experience, and that includes the environmental sustainability of those parks as well.
Last question. I know that we've missed a few and there's a few more to go, but we'll take those offline. But the last one from Brad Riddle around a detailed business case. I know you've briefly touched on that. It's dealt with more substantially in the guidelines. I understand there's a threshold of over 100,000 additional information needs to provide. What support will the department provide for people that may have to do a significant amount of work to develop their concepts?
Yeah, so this is explicitly excluded from funding. So we're not in a position to fund the business case. So we would expect proponents to do that. As you said, Sean, we're not expecting a detailed business case for all applications, only those over $100,000. So if you've got a smaller project, obviously there's less onus on you in the application phase. But there are other grants available, a number of grants at the moment offering business support for people who have to do that. We're trying to standardise we've got a lot of templates that we've provided to make that application process a bit easier. It's still a bit of work, and it's a bit like applying for a tourism award. There's a fair bit of work that goes into it, but it is actually about helping you work through the process, develop up an application that actually could deliver a significant financial benefit to you. I know it takes time, but we're there to help in terms of support, just not financial support.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. I think that's been a good number of questions. I know there's a few that we haven't got to, but hopefully we'll be able to do them out of session. We're well ahead of time, but I think we can finish up a little bit early. Chris, if I could just ask you for a bit of a wrap up in terms of the information that Ju's presented today, and also I think the website is the place that people need to go to in the first instance.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And look, thanks again, everyone, for participating. It's first tilt at a Zoom webinar with over 200 people. That's a great turn up. I'm really impressed that there's this much interest in our fund. If you've got ideas and questions and thoughts, please do come to us. As I said, the email and phone number is there. The website is a really good source of information. We will be updating the website regularly with new FAQs. I certainly hope to put this video up there afterwards. I'll take all the comments from the side and make sure they go into the FAQs. And yes, please work with us. We're keen to develop some nature-based tourism experiences. We love to, my KPI is to spend the $5 million. So, we want to spend $5 million at partnering with you to develop world-class visitor experiences. So help us help you. Take advantage of Sean's services. TIC SA has got some great stuff happening over the next few months. Take advantage of that. Keep in touch with us. Think creatively about your business growth ideas. It's always a bit difficult this time, and we're all just coming out of COVID and bushfires, and you guys have done it really tough. But it's nice to think that there's the government's investing, that we're behind you, we're supporting you, come out of this phase, and we really want to see you bounce back stronger, better. And if we can put a bit of money in your pocket while we're doing that, that's fantastic. So we're here for the long term, so 2-year funds. So get on board, and I hope we can do this again in the near future.
Thanks, Chris. In terms of just rounding out the session, I'll just speak for a few more minutes. So if you've got time, please stay online. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge Joe Podoliak, Chris, and their team for the work that they've done on this program. There's great opportunity here for tourism and conservation to develop some outstanding projects. Chris touched on it earlier in his presentation, and I'll just quickly go over it now. Ju had funded TIC SA for us to deliver some support activities over the next few months, and if possible, I'll just put it up on screen in terms of what that, to give a little bit more detail in terms of what those sessions will be. Next week we will be, I think it's actually same time, we'll be doing a webinar in terms of developing your business case. Obviously, as Chris has outlined, the more detail, the more well considered your business case can be, the better it will be in terms of the way the government will view it. We've got 4 speakers lined up. We've got someone from Hood Sweeney who'll be able to talk about all the numbers and all the financial information that you need to provide as part of a professional business prospectus. We've got a planning company that will be coming in, and they'll look at the different approvals that you need to get to actually build infrastructure, not just in the areas that Chris has been talking about, but potentially as part of broader projects. We've got an architect coming in looking at the way in which you cleverly think about infrastructure in today's world. And then we've got someone coming in to talk about the visitor experience, and maybe those projects that don't have as much built infrastructure, but they're still very much around delivering top quality visitor experiences. So we'll send out some information this afternoon about that session and encourage you to join that session to further develop your ideas and concepts. The week after, on the 24th of June, we've got an application writer who will be joining us. Keith Whelan, we've used him previously. He's been very good for proposals that people have been looking to write, grant applications. He'll be running a session on the 24th of June that I'm sure will help all of you put together the words that you need and the proposals that you need to put together in a way that government's going to view your application positively. We'll then be running a session around connecting proponents with potential innovative solutions to infrastructure, to visitor experience, to technology. That session is about looking at, I've got a great idea, but I need some contractors to work with me on making sure that my idea can actually be conceptualized and then delivered as a visitor experience. So it's really about connecting people with innovative, progressive businesses that supply services and support that can help you develop your business idea. I think that one we're looking at for the 27th of June. We'll then be running 2 other elements in terms of the support for proponents as you work through it. The first one we're calling Road Test Your Tourism Concept. It's about actually putting up your proposal, a short application to a panel of experts who will then provide feedback on your proposal. Have you thought about this? What about that? It's the Shark Tank concept in inverted commas, because it's not the Hollywood version, it's a nuts and bolts version. It's very much about people being able to bounce their ideas around in a confidential manner with other experts who will add value to your thinking, the what if type conversations. And then the last one is really getting down to that detail as you begin to write your application, as you finalise the first draft, to actually get some support from someone who can look at the words that you're putting on the page, look at the way in which you're building your document, and can actually help with that tangible grant writing, words on the page, as I said before. So we're still working through all of the details of all of these. Some of it's based around tourism awards, where we have a significant program of support that helps people work through the submission process. We're very confident that these 5 steps will add significant value to the work that many of you will do as you develop your proposals. Again, I'd like to acknowledge the Department for Environment and Water for their support to make this happen. Without their support to fund our costs to provide this 5-step process, and we just wouldn't be able to do it. So there'll be more information coming out, as I said, later this afternoon, with a copy or a recording of today's session. I encourage you to engage, to look for opportunities to develop new world-class visitor experiences across our state. And I think that's it for our session today. So again, thank you all for taking time out of this cold June morning. Please go to the website and collect further information, and please engage with the support program that I've just outlined. Thanks again, everyone.